Namaste, Witchlings. Hello, hello, hello. All right. So, before we start this episode tonight, I need you all to understand something. What I am talking about tonight is not a headline to me. This is not just cable news background noise. This is not a political chessboard. This is lineage. When I hear the word war, I don't picture maps. I see my father. I see my grandfather on a submarine in the Pacific during World War II, third in command, underwater for months at a time, a steel hull, the only thing between him and the ocean. I picture Vietnam. I picture deployment letters. I picture folded flags. I picture the way my brother and sister veterans sit with their backs to the wall in restaurants and their eyes on the doors. I picture VA waiting rooms or the silence that falls over a family when someone asks a question that nobody's really willing and ready to answer yet. War is not abstract in my bloodline. It is literally generational. And I need y'all to hear this clearly. I am not speaking tonight as a political operative. I am not speaking as a partisan. I am speaking as a service-connected disabled veteran. I am speaking as third-generation military, as someone whose brothers served, whose cousins served, whose children's fathers served. I am speaking as someone who knows what comes home and what doesn't. Because what comes home is not victory speeches. What comes home is nervous systems that don't turn off. Grief that doesn't trend. Paperwork, appointments, strain, hypervigilance. Memories that really don't ask permission before they just pop up. And what doesn't come home? The versions of them that left untouched. Those years that you just do not get back. The innocence. Some of our friends. So, when I hear leaders dismiss the rules of engagement, when I hear campaign promises about avoiding war collide with escalating conflict, when I watch us inch closer and closer to yet another prolonged entanglement in the Middle East, I don't respond casually. I respond with the weight of that inheritance. And this episode is not going to be about being anti-American. It is not about hating my government or my military or my country. This episode is about being pro-human. Pro-service member, pro-accountability. Because if you truly, truly love the troops and you truly support our military, you do not cheer when they are sent out into harm's way. You ask whether it is absolutely fucking necessary. And if you truly love your country, you don't confuse aggression with strength. You demand discipline. So we're going to take a breath. We're going to settle our nervous system. This is not a rant. This is a testimony. And we are going to walk through it carefully. Let's start with lineage. Let me introduce myself to you. I am Lin. I am the Yoga Witch. I am a service-connected disabled veteran. I am an activist. I am a human. I am a former military wife. We will get into my lineage here momentarily. As I said, I am a service-connected disabled veteran. I earned the National Defense Service Medal. I served during what was technically a time of war. But this doesn't start with me. My father, Vietnam veteran, submariner. His in-laws, my incubator's parents, both served during World War II. They were both active duty Navy. My grandfather was a submarine line officer, third in command on the USS Wahoo in the Pacific. I am third generation. But let me tell you, that phrase is almost a little too tidy because it doesn't quite explain the scope. My grandfather and two of his siblings served. My uncles served my mother's brothers, Coast Guard and Navy. My daddy, Navy. Two of my older brothers, Navy. My cousins, one went Army, two went Navy. I served. The fathers of my children were all Navy. In this family, you would really have to look hard to find someone who didn't wear a uniform who was qualified. Service in our family wasn't an anomaly. It was the air we breathed. War is not just a news cycle in my house. It's an inheritance. And war is the way certain stories get told slowly. We had a Pearl Harbor survivor in our family. War is the way that certain stories never get told at all. I didn't know he was a Pearl Harbor survivor until after he passed away. War is how a room shifts when fireworks go off outside. It's the silence at the dinner table when someone asks, "What was it like?" When you grow up in that lineage, you do not romanticize conflict. You understand the cost. And cost, honey, that is not just lives lost. It is nervous systems altered. It is marriages strained and broken. It's children raised by parents who came home different. It's VA appointments. It's the never-ending paperwork. And it's the invisible injuries that don't show up on x-rays. The way someone sits with their back to the wall in the restaurant without even thinking about it. It's the way sleep becomes a negotiation. It's the way a smell, a sound, a date on a calendar can change the entire emotional temperature of the whole household. That cost lingers. Now, mind you, I know I do not fit the stereotype many people carry in their heads when they picture a veteran. I'm pierced. I got my septum, both nostrils, dates, eyebrow. I'm pierced. My hair was purple. And I'm saving up to do it again. Want to have my purple hair back. I am obviously kind of overweight. Tattooed. I am very openly liberal. And for many people, this visual doesn't line up with their mental image of military. But stereotypes, while they do exist for a reason, are very rarely the whole truth. Service does not have a dress code. Understanding war does not require looking like a recruitment poster. Lived experience does not evaporate simply because someone is uncomfortable with the package it comes in. None of these things, the purple hair, the piercings, the tattoos, none of these things erase my military heritage. I come from a proud military family. Hell, most of my family are conservative, too. I just happen to be the rainbow sheep. And the military is not a monolith. Veterans, we are not cardboard cutouts. We are not cookie cutters. We are complicated and diverse because we are human. Some of us wear nose rings and still understand rules of engagement better than people who have never worn a uniform a single solitary day in their frickin' lives. So when I say I am uneasy right now, I am not speaking from ignorance. I am not blowing smoke up your ass. I am speaking from inheritance, lived experience, and fucking knowing what comes home and what gets left in the goddamn sandbox. Because once again, what comes home is not victory speeches. It's not the president standing on board a fucking aircraft carrier saying, "Mission accomplished." What comes home is hypervigilance. survivor's guilt, paperwork. Oh my God, the paperwork. Therapy appointments, and the long, slow slog of reintegration. What comes home is the attempt to explain something that cannot fully be explained. And what doesn't come home? The untouched version of who they were before that deployment. The simplicity. The years that were supposed to just be ordinary. The friends that didn't make it back. When you carry that awareness in your body, you do not talk about war lightly. You do not treat it like just another talking point. You treat it like something sacred and utterly dangerous. So, when I watch us escalate towards war with Iran, I'm not reacting as a pundit. I react as someone who knows, again, what comes home and what does not. And I need you all to understand something very, very clearly. My discomfort with all of this shit is not anti-American. It is deeply, fiercely pro-service member. There's a huge difference. When you love the people who wear the uniform, you don't treat war casually. You treat it like a last resort. And right now, I am watching rhetoric escalate in ways that make my veteran bones so weary and uneasy. Recently, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said that we are not going to get bogged down in rules of engagement. That phrase is doing a lot of work, my friends. So let's unpack it calmly. Rules of engagement are not bureaucratic red tape. They are operational guidelines. They tell service members when force is authorized, under what conditions, against what targets, and yes, the uniform on the enemy service member is not a target, and with what limitations. They are how commanders implement the law of armed conflict in real time. They are how the principles of the Geneva Conventions, protections of civilians, humane treatment of prisoners, proportionality in force, get translated from treaty language into battlefield behavior. They're guardrails. And something a lot of civilians may not recognize and realize. Service members are trained on these rules extensively. They are hammered into our heads. You don't just hear about them once and move on. They are briefed before deployments, they are reviewed before missions, and they are drilled into muscle memory. Scenarios walked through, clarifications are demanded, and they are not optional vibes. They are drilled, rehearsed, and reviewed. Because discipline is strength, restraint is strength. Professionalism is strength. In the military, the ability to apply force is not what earns respect. The ability to apply force precisely and with control, meaning and knowing when not to, is what earns respect. There is an enormous difference. Rules of engagement exist to protect civilians, yes. Not arguing this. But they also protect our service members. They provide a little bit of clarity in chaos and reduce ambiguity in split-second decisions. They create structure inside environments that are otherwise destabilizing. They are not a hindrance to victory. They are a part of what makes a force honorable. So, when leadership frames rules of engagement as something inconvenient, something we shouldn't get bogged down by, It rattles those of us who understand why those rules exist. Because once you start characterizing ethical limits as obstacles, you are creating cultural permission to cut corners. And that's where things get dangerous. Language shapes culture, and culture shapes conduct. When tone from the top shifts, it does not stay abstract. As opposed to economics, it does trickle down into briefings, into unit conversations, into what feels emphasized and what feels minimized. Now, to be precise, dismissive rhetoric does not automatically mean the Geneva Conventions disappear. The U.S. is still bound by international law. Military lawyers still exist. The Uniform Code of Military Justice still applies. Had to pause for a second because I always want to say the UCMJ, but I realize not everybody knows what UCMJ stands for. But still, tone matters. If you signal that guardrails are optional or annoying, you create an environment where restraint can start to feel like weakness instead of professionalism. And that is a subtle but very, very significant cultural shift. I am not saying that one sentence erases decades of law. Far from it. What I am saying is that words from a Secretary of Defense carry weight. And yes, when Kegsbreath talks about not getting bogged down, I hear a casualness that freaks me the fuck out. And yes, I called him Kegsbreath. Most of us in the community do. I digress. But not because I think troops suddenly forget their training. No. But because I understand how morale, messaging, and mission framing work. The military runs on clarity. You want your people to know exactly what the boundaries are. Pillage first, then burn. You want them to feel confident in the rules. You want them to know that if they operate within these guidelines, leadership has their back. If you start muddying that message, if you imply that constraints are nuisances, you risk confusion in the one place confusion cannot afford to exist: the battlefield. And another thing that a lot of civilians don't always grasp. Most service members take the law of armed conflict very, very seriously. They don't want to harm civilians. They don't want to operate in legal gray zones. They want clear directives and professionalism, and most of all, they really just want to do their jobs correctly. The stereotype that troops are itching for chaos is so fucking insulting. What they are trained for is discipline, which is why rhetoric dismissing those guardrails feels so off-key. War without guardrails is not strength. It's volatility. It increases civilian casualties, and it increases international backlash. It also increases the very, very serious likelihood of strategic blowback. And it increases the psychological burden on the people executing those missions. Because if you loosen moral structure in the moment, you tighten psychological consequences after the fact. That is not politics. That is straight up human neurobiology. When people operate in morally ambiguous conditions, it lingers. It becomes moral injury. It becomes the kind of internal conflict that even with therapy, it takes decades to unpack. Restraint protects more than bodies. It protects consciences. And that is not softness, my friends. That is sustainability. Now, I'm not naive. Not naive. In combat zones, decisions are complex. Intelligence shifts moment to moment sometimes. Threat assessments evolve. There are definitely moments where split-second judgment is required. But that is exactly why you want guardrails. You don't remove safety mechanisms because a machine is powerful, you reinforce them. So when I hear language that frames rules of engagement as something to avoid being bogged down by, I don't panic. I recognize pattern. The pattern where escalation is being framed as decisiveness, nuance is framed as weakness, and caution is framed as hesitation. And those of us who've served know just how quickly tone from the top trickles down. This isn't hysteria. Once again, it is pattern recognition. It's someone who has lived inside that system saying, hi, language like that matters a lot. It's someone who understands that ethical conduct in war is not automatic. It is cultivated, reinforced, and modeled. Like good parenting. And it begins with leadership taking restraint seriously. If we are going to enter another conflict, if escalation continues, then the absolute last thing I want to hear is the dismissal of the very structures designed to prevent chaos. Because strength is not the absence of rules. Strength is the disciplined adherence to those rules. And if we forget that, we don't become more powerful, we become less stable. And instability in war does not stay contained. I also want to address something else that has been reported in multiple mainstream outlets, because this is where the rhetoric is moving from uncomfortable to destabilizing. I picked this up from Newsweek. There are multiple other outlets reporting this via the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. The Military Religious Freedom Foundation says that it has received complaints from service members alleging that in some units, commanders have used explicitly religious language when discussing the conflict in Iran. Some troops reportedly described briefings that referenced the Book of Revelation. One complaint cited a commander allegedly saying that President Trump was anointed by Jesus for this moment, that this conflict was part of a grand divine plan. Let me be clear. These are reported allegations from service members and a watchdog organization. This is not necessarily official Pentagon policy. There has been no formal directive from the Department of Defense declaring this war the beginning of Armageddon. Armageddon. Precision matters, but the fact that these complaints are being reported at all should make us pause. We should be stopping and going, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. Because the United States military is constitutionally bound to remain secular in its official function. Service members swear an oath to the Constitution, not to a theology. We swear an oath to the Constitution to support and defend it. We do not declare an oath to the president, to the flag, or to the Secretary of War and his fucking ego. Faith is something deeply, deeply personal, and many, many service members are people of faith, but there are just as many who are not. The military includes Christians, Muslims, Jews, atheists, pagans, agnostics, every flavor of belief that you can imagine. I have known multiple of all of the above who are military or veterans. Now, unit cohesion depends on professionalism, not prophecy. So when war is framed as strategy, it's subject to debate, oversight, and accountability. When war is framed as destiny, as divine mandate, as inevitable biblical fulfillment, accountability erodes if it doesn't just disappear altogether. Because if something is God's will, then questioning it becomes heresy instead of civic duty. And that, my friends, is some seriously dangerous terrain. Not because faith in and of itself is dangerous, but because conflating faith with military command authority destabilizes the very neutrality the Constitution demands. I am not mocking religion. Hell, I was the religious person for my boot camp division. I am not attacking belief. Fuck no. I am saying that when service members are being sent into harm's way, the rationale needs to be strategic, lawful, and accountable, not apocalyptic. Because if you tell a 19-year-old kid that what they are about to do is ordained by God and a part of the end times, you are not just shaping policy, you are shaping psychology. And that has consequences. The United States military's strength has always rested on discipline, law, and civilian oversight, not divine endorsement. If individual commanders are blurring that line even rhetorically, it warrants some scrutiny, not hysteria. Not hysteria, scrutiny. Because once war becomes theology, it becomes untouchable. And nothing in a constitutional republic should be untouchable. This is not about demonizing anyone, though. I want to make sure you understand that. I am not demonizing anyone. This is solely about maintaining the separation between church and state inside the most powerful military apparatus on earth. The constitutionally required separation of church and state. Language matters. Tone matters. Framing matters. Because culture shapes conduct. And those of us who have served understand that the trickle-down effect of leadership language is not hypothetical. It is lived. This is not hysteria, my lovelies. This is pattern recognition. All right, you guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, maybe you feel called to step just a little bit deeper into our coven here, go ahead and tap that join button and become a channel member. There are amazing perks waiting for all of my witchlings with membership levels starting at $1 a month. That is very affordable. But if membership isn't in the cards for you right now, you can still support this channel for free by doing the whole like, share, and subscribe thing, sharing this video with a friend. Oh. All right, you guys, I so very much appreciate all of your support. Thank you for tuning in. Back to the show. All right, let's talk about the president during his campaign. So during his campaign, the president stated clearly that under his leadership, we would not be dragged into World War III. He specifically mentioned that we would not be at war with Iran. That was part of the promise. That was part of what he ran his entire campaign on. It was not vague, not implied. It was direct. The messaging was strength through deterrence, strength through unpredictability, strength that would prevent escalation rather than trigger it. He has also referred to himself as a peace president, claiming credit for preventing conflicts and ending wars. He has spoken about deserving recognition for keeping America out of prolonged entanglements. Those were campaign themes. Now we're watching tensions rise with Iran again. Citizens are currently being allowed to compare rhetoric with reality. If we are escalating toward direct conflict with Iran, it is reasonable here to ask, what changed? Was intelligence different than expected? Was deterrence insufficient? Were diplomatic avenues exhausted? Were prior assessments inaccurate? Those are some adult grown-up questions, and asking them is not betrayal. That, my friends, is civic literacy. Democracy is not blind loyalty. It is informed accountability. There's that word again, accountability. A healthy republic depends on citizens who can hold two things at once: support for the people who serve and scrutiny of the people who send them. And I need this to be very, very, very clear. Opposing escalation does not mean opposing troops. In fact, it is very often the polar opposite. When you have seen the cost of war up close and personal, you become a little more cautious. Not weak, cautious. There is a huge difference between fear-based paralysis and informed restraint. Caution is not cowardice, is memory. Because once deployment orders go out, you can't rewind them. You cannot undo combat trauma, and you sure as fuck cannot unring the bell of moral injury. You cannot uncreate Gold Star families. Necromancy is yet to be an actual thing. Just saying. There are already some new Gold Star families in this current escalation, and it has been, 4 days? That right there should sober everybody. Not inflame them, sober them. War is not a social media dunk. It is not a campaign talking point. War is families receiving phone calls or a knock on the door that they will never, ever, ever forget. I have a close friend who is an active duty spouse right now. Her husband is deployed, and we don't have a return date to this deployment. They don't know what the conditions are going to look like. Hell, she doesn't even know exactly where he's going. They don't know what the tempo is going to become. They have no idea if this is a short-term or open-ended deployment. This is not theoretical. This is happening in living rooms, kitchens, in bedrooms where one side of the bed is empty. And that is why rhetoric matters. When political messaging says we are the peace administration, while military escalation increases, citizens are allowed to hold that tension up to the light. That is not being disloyal. It is responsible. Campaign promises are not sacred vows, no, but they are not meaningless either. They are representations of intent. They are part of the social contract between leaders and voters. If circumstances change, leaders can explain that. They can present evidence. They can make a case. They can articulate why prior commitments no longer apply. That is governance. But silence or contradiction without explanation erodes trust. And trust is not a minor thing in a democracy. It is foundational. Now, I am not suggesting that geopolitics are simple, because we all know they are not. All administrations face shifting intelligence. All leaders confront evolving threats. Absolutely no one controls the entire international chessboard. But here is what remains constant. War carries cost. And the American public deserves clarity about why that cost is being incurred. Not slogans, not bravado, and not divine destiny language. Clarity. What is the objective? What is the timeline? What is the exit strategy? And what metrics are we going to measure success by? What constitutes mission completion? These are not hostile questions. And if you have been watching the press conferences, when those questions are asked, the leadership is acting like they are personal attacks and they are refusing to answer them. But these are responsible, reasonable questions. Because if you remove questioning from the equation, you remove the citizen from citizenship. And that, my friends, is not how a constitutional republic functions. There is a long history in this country of citizens supporting troops while protesting wars. These two positions are not mutually exclusive, my friends. They never have been. You can hang a flag and still demand a justification. You can love your country and still critique its decisions. Hell, I do it every damn day. In fact, loving your country deeply often makes you more critical, not less, because you understand the stakes. And here's something that really, really, really bugs me. When war becomes framed as a test of loyalty, things have gone sideways. If disagreement equals treason in the public discourse, we have all lost the plot. The oath service members take, that's on this cute little flag right here. The oath service members take is to the Constitution. The Constitution enshrines debate. It protects dissent. It assumes disagreement. That is not weakness. That is there by design. So when I ask what changed between campaign promises of avoiding war with Iran and the current escalation, I'm not undermining our troops. I am honoring them. Because if we are going to send people, if we are going to send kids, because come on, most of our military is between the ages of 17 and 25. So if we are going to send kids into harm's way, we sure as fuck owe them some honesty and precision, and we owe them clear articulation of why their lives are being risked. And if that articulation cannot withstand questioning, that is not the fault of the question or the questioner. It is the weakness of the rationale. Now, this is not about party allegiance. This is, once again, about pattern recognition. We were told strength would prevent World War III. We were told we would not be at war with Iran. And now we're watching events unfold that look increasingly like the very things voters were told would not happen. Citizens are allowed to notice. They're allowed to ask. And they are sure as hell allowed to hold leadership accountable without being branded disloyal. Because democracy is not performance. It is participation. And participation includes scrutiny, especially when the cost of silence is measured in deployments. Here's what I know. And it ain't much. But here's what I know. I do not want war. I do not want escalation. I really do not want another generation of veterans navigating lifelong trauma. Don't want another 40 years of entanglement in the Middle East. And saying that does not make me soft. That makes me someone who understands the cost, the true cost. There is this strange cultural habit in this country where caution gets mislabeled as weakness, where restraint gets framed as cowardice, and where the loudest voice in the room gets mistaken for the strongest one. That, my friends, is not how strength actually works. True patriotism is not cheering escalation. It is demanding that force be used only when absolutely unavoidable. True loyalty to our troops is not silence. It is insisting that their lives are sacred enough to warrant some restraint. Here's an uncomfortable truth. The people advocating most loudly for war are typically the furthest from bearing its cost. The cost? That cost is borne by the 19-year-old signing a will or deployment paperwork or calling mom and dad saying, hey, you're not going to hear from me for a little while. The cost is borne by a spouse refreshing her phone or his phone at 2 a.m. The cost is borne by the parent waiting for a knock on the door that they pray never, ever, ever comes. So if you truly love our troops, you do not treat them like symbols. You treat them like human beings. Power without discipline is not strength. It is fucking ego. In yoga, strength without alignment leads to injury. You can muscle through a pose for a while, but without structure and breath, something eventually tears. In magic, power without intention leads to chaos. Energy without grounding destabilizes the very space you are trying to shape. In governance, force without restraint leads to catastrophe. History proves that one over and over and over again. Empires don't fall because they were too cautious. They fall because they believed themselves untouchable. They fall because escalation became reflex instead of last resort. They fall because pride replaced prudence. We know this. We know this. And if we know this, then the adult response to rising tension is not hysteria. It's clarity. It's asking those hard questions. It is insisting on the constitutional boundaries. It's remembering that military power is a tool, not an identity. The United States is powerful. That's a fact. Nobody's arguing that. But power divorced from accountability corrodes from the inside. Strength is not how quickly you can deploy force. Strength is how deliberately you choose when not to. That requires emotional regulation at a national level. Emotional regulation. And yes, that does sound almost impossible. But nations are made of people. If we as citizens cannot regulate ourselves, we cannot resist outrage cycles, cannot verify before amplifying, cannot distinguish rhetoric from reality, then, well, we become easier to manipulate. Panic helps no one, except at the disco. Discernment helps everyone. So, here's the grounded fire. We stay informed from credible sources, not algorithm-fed adrenaline. We contact our representatives because they are accountable to us. We support our military families, practically, financially, emotionally. We support our veterans, not just with words on holidays, but with sustained advocacy for healthcare and services. Might I remind you that Doge decimated the veteran suicide hotline, and we're walking into World War III. It has not been fixed yet. We absolutely refuse to let war become background noise. We refuse to let the phrase escalation become normalized, and we regulate ourselves while we do it. Because outrage burns hot and fast, but sustained civic engagement requires stamina. You can be angry and still be disciplined. You can be concerned and still be clear. You can oppose escalation and still honor service. I will always, always, always support the humans who serve. I will always advocate for their safety, dignity, access to care, and their right to reintegrate into a society that does not forget them once the headlines fade. And I reserve the right as a veteran, as a citizen, as a third-generation military family member to question the leadership who sends them into danger. That is not disloyalty. That is devotion. Devotion to the oath, the Constitution, and to those human beings who signed their names on that dotted line. Because loyalty to people is higher than loyalty to rhetoric. And that distinction matters. I'm not interested in fear-mongering. I'm not interested in partisan shouting matches. I am interested in protecting the people who carry the cost. So, let me close this show the way I always do, but with a little bit more gravity tonight. Go out there and spread love. Spread joy. Spread kindness. Not the performative kind, the steady kind. The kind that shows up for military spouses with casseroles and childcare. The kind that checks in on veterans when the news cycle spikes. The kind that writes letters to representatives instead of doom scrolling. Tell your people you love them. Do not assume they know. Say it. Say it to the ones in uniform. Say it to the ones like me who came home kind of different. Say it to the ones waiting to go. And if you are wearing the uniform, or you love someone who is, always remember, your life is not a political prop. It's not a campaign slogan. It's not a fucking talking point. It is sacred. You are sacred. Stay awake. Stay regulated. God, is that hard right now. Stay engaged. Even harder. Demand clarity. Demand accountability. Demand restraint when restraint is warranted. And remember this. Demanding caution before war is not weakness. It is moral courage, constitutional fidelity, and it is love expressed through discipline. We can be strong without being reckless. We can be patriotic without going blind. We can support our troops without supporting every fucking deployment. That balance is not easy, though, but it is necessary. And if you take one thing from tonight, I want it to be that you know you are allowed to question power. You are allowed to grieve escalation. You are allowed to want peace without apology. That is not softness. That is strength aligned, and aligned strength is the only kind that lasts. You are loved. You are wanted. You are needed. And you're here for a reason, even if you don't know what that reason is yet. Stay informed, stay angry, and stay magical. I love you guys to bits. Namaste, Witchlings. Yeah. Now let's check in with chat. Okay. Okay. Somebody asked my MO. I was a radioman. Okay. Somebody asked what my MO was. I was a radioman in the United States Navy. My dad was a submarine sonar tech. One brother was a cook. The other brother started out as a personnelman and became a master at arms. Military cop. Nobody in the military would agree with me. Oh, that's hilarious. Oh, you were on the Indy. Cool. Mimi, you have nothing to apologize for. I see that. Stay safe, my friends. It's getting wild out there. I'll see y'all later.